Hey, what's happening, friend? Big Dog Ethan here. You're listening to WMTS 88.3 FM in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And this is none other than the Unnatural State of Affairs, where in the first hour I give you my lefty spin on the current events of today. That's redundant. And in the second hour I play some awesome punk rock, few rap tunes too, if I find some good ones. Anyways, so yeah, for those watching this on the Kennel, I should probably point out the obvious. Yes, you can see that I've got a Band-Aid on my face. All I'll say is electric scooters are a blast, but they can also be kind of risky too. It does help to wear a helmet, that is for damn sure. Anyways, that's all I'll say about that. But I do have a few other, housekeeping things, I guess, to mention. First off, for those of you who aren't going to MTSU, you might not know, this is the last show for the semester. Thanks to everyone for tuning in live on WMTS or watching these on my Substack, The Kennel. You can find The Kennel at thekennel.substack.com. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to a dorky college kid ramble and rave about the wild shit that's going down in today's news. It'd be cool if I could do these over the summer. I wish I could, but I've got a better opportunity because, your big dog just got an internship. Yes, I can hear you saying out loud, someone decided to hire this fucking loudmouth. But I'm very glad to share that I'll be working an internship with the Physicians for Social Responsibility. They're a nonprofit in D.C. that is all about advocating for nuclear weapons disarmament, which, if you've been watching this show or any of the stuff I've posted on the Kennel, you'd probably understand that that is something that's definitely up my alley. Now, with that said, of course, I'm really not going to have much time to upload anything here. So, you're not going to be seeing any uploads to the Kennel over the summer, but that is only going to be temporary. Not only will I be coming back onto the WMTS airwaves louder and brasher than ever before, but I'll also be doing my honors thesis over the summer. I'll be doing the written portion, and then in the fall semester, I'm going to be doing the creative portion of it, which will involve me interviewing different guests on the Kennel to talk about all sorts of political topics. It's going to be very important, especially since, we have this election coming up in November, which that is gonna be painful to endure, but I will be there suffering with you for whatever it's worth. So with all the housekeeping out of the way, let's get into a little overview of what I'll be talking about today. So last week, I had to do the show a bit differently due to an inability to get the full recorded show prepped in time. I did a couple of rambly segments to satisfy station requirements for an issue segment every hour, but I still had to drop one segment that I wanted to do, and frankly, I don't even think the ones that I did end up doing made the cut for an upload to the Kennel. So I'm just going to do those segments the way I wanted to do them, thoroughly written, recorded, and edited. The first segment will deal with the suppression of pro-Palestine student protesters. This was the one I couldn't fit in last week because there's a lot to talk about with this one, and boy, oh boy, do I have a lot of goddamn thoughts on it. Second one will be on the successful union election that took place at the VW plant in Chattanooga. Now it's been probably 2 weeks now. I did talk about this last week, of course, but I want to be sure I recorded something for the Kennel to speak about it because it is a massive deal for unionization efforts in Tennessee and really the entire South. So some very rare good news I'll be talking about on this show. And the final segment I'll touch on, it's going to be a brief update on the effort to rename our Army ROTC building here on campus, the infamous Forrest Hall. named after the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. We're in the 21st century. It's the 21st century, and we still have buildings on a college campus named after Confederate generals, first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. It's insane. Anyways, I'll be talking more about that in that segment, but I'll save it for that segment because now I'd like to talk to you all about the suppression of pro-Palestine student protesters on college campuses, if I can talk today. It's enraging. It's absolutely enraging. So, for the past 2 weeks, we have seen a surge in pro-Palestine demonstrations on college campuses. For those watching the video version on the Kennel, here is a graphic compiled by the Washington Post. It's does a pretty good job of showing just how widespread these are. So, you have like a cluster of them in Texas. Of course, you have like a lot, especially in like northeastern universities. You have like a lot up here on the northeast coast, and really, you just have like a lot of these sporadic ones that have just popped up across the country, really in the past 2 weeks. Of course, campus demonstrations in general have been going on for some time now, but the sharp escalation in protests started on April 17th. When hundreds of Columbia University students set up tents on an on-campus lawn. I want to focus mainly on the protest at Columbia University first, and then I'll zoom out to a broader view of the campus protests nationwide. Now, before I start giving you all the facts, I'd like to absolutely commend the student news media organizations at Columbia University for doing extensive on-the-ground coverage of the protest and calling out the BS that university administration have been spewing the entire time. The student paper, the Columbia Spectator, has provided scathing coverage of the outright suppression of student protesters, enabled by Columbia University's obstinate administration. On top of that, the student radio station has dedicated nonstop 24/7 coverage of the protests. I literally tuned in a couple of days ago in the evening, and they were doing live reporting on the recent police takeover of the campus, which, yeah, we'll get to that in a second. We here at WMTS, and I'm not saying this to like disrespect the station, as we are primarily a music station that doesn't really do a lot of direct news coverage. But we here at WMTS, as far as I know, we don't do that kind of late night coverage on breaking news. So I have absolute mad respect for those students staying up throughout the night to deliver those important updates. On top of that, too, the student radio there has been giving this coverage in spite of, at best, accidental intimidation by campus police and, at worst, blatant intimidation by university administration. This comes from an April 20th statement pinned on their Twitter. Quote, at 10:23 p.m., a Columbia University public safety officer entered WKCR's station and alerted staff and executive board that all individuals were to evacuate and leave the building, that Alfred Lerner Hall, of which WKCR is a part, had been entirely evacuated, and again, that we were to leave. We were alerted to this situation while live broadcasting and thus announced immediately on air. We then called our Columbia advisor in order to help us clarify the situation, to which he explained that he had no prior knowledge of a situation such as this happening to WKCR. After discussion and explanation of WKCR's status as a press organization with a duty to the people of NYC to operate a 24/7 FM signal, and a number of phone calls from the public safety officer to Alfred Lerner's building manager, we were told that this was a misunderstanding and we would be allowed to continue to occupy the space, unquote. Considering that no reason for the evacuation was provided to establish an immediate threat to the station workers' safety, I'm suspecting that something more malicious was at play. And I suspect that the station is scared of any stronger retaliation from the university. I tuned into a broadcast about a week ago at like 1 a.m, and it featured some tense reporting from students saying stuff like, what I can say right now is that I am personally worried about the safety of the campus. Like, they weren't willing to provide any commentary on the absurdity of the administration's crackdown on student protesters, and I don't blame them. After their experience with campus public safety department, it's absolutely understandable that these students are making damn sure not to kick rocks at school administration. It's student media at Columbia University right now that is giving these protesters a voice when mainstream news pinheads are at best, trying to give a balanced and objective portrayal of the protests, and at worst, blatantly smearing them as pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic terrorists that want to see the genocide of Jews, destruction of Israel, and overthrow of the U.S. government. You know how it goes. More on that later. For now, let's start off with the actually fair coverage coming from the school's student paper. This is from the Columbia Spectator on April 18th. Quote, hundreds of students set up tents on South Lawn beginning at around 4 a.m. on Wednesday morning, pledging to occupy the space until the university divests from companies with ties to Israel. The protest began only hours before University President Manoush Shafiq testified before Congress alongside Board of Trustees, co-chairs Claire Shipman and David Greenwald, as well as David Scheiser. Hope I'm pronouncing that right, if I can talk today. As well as David Scheiser, the co-chair of the Antisemitism Task Force. On Thursday afternoon, the New York Police Department took 108 individuals into custody after Shafiq authorized police to come to campus. The encampment was entering its 34th hour. Protesters who were marching around the eastern perimeter of South Lawn prior to the arrival of NYPD officers stood looking on as those residing in the encampment were led off the lawn in zip ties. Following the arrest, demonstrators who previously surrounded the outer edge of the lawn traveled to the west side of South Lawn, where they reassembled the encampment and resumed their occupation as the demonstration approached its 2-day mark. Quote, the presence of tents on South Lawn is a safety concern and a violation of university policies, unquote, a university spokesperson wrote in a statement to Spectator. Quote, we are informing the students they are in violation of university policies, and for their own safety and for the operation of the university, they need to leave, unquote. You know, it's so funny. I don't know if anyone has seen the 5th Harry Potter movie, but there's the professor who is at Dolores Umbridge, where, you know, whenever she's like panicking and like doesn't like students who are like I don't know, getting out of hand or whatever, she starts shrieking, I will have order, I will have order. That is exactly what these pinheads at Columbia University sound like. I mean, it's just insane. Literally, they are being peaceful. They have tents set up on the lawn. They're not like harassing students. They are literally just camping there in their tents on the lawn. It's insane. It's insane that even that they're so upset about. Now, the paper's April 26th staff editorial on the university's response to the protest was quite the indictment of the university's administration. Now, I want to read that thing in its totality, as I think it perfectly represents the insanity of the administration's decisions. It's titled, President Shafiq, This is Your Legacy. Quote, President Shafiq, 1 week ago, you authorized the New York Police Department to clear Columbia South Lawn of student protesters. We watched police officers zip tie and arrest 108 of our friends, classmates, and co-workers. In response, Students have mobilized in the hundreds at Columbia and campuses across the country, defending their right to peaceful protest for divestment from Israel. Now, police battalions surround campus. Students enter and exit through security checkpoints. NYPD correctional buses circle the block. Helicopters drone overhead. Reporters probe students for front-page quotes, and communication from the administration has all but disappeared, with the exception, of course, of ominous late-night emails. Columbia has become a national spectacle. Instead of defending your students' rights to free expression or engaging publicly with activist organizations, you and other administrators are scrambling to save face, granting campus access to select media outlets, the founder of a hate group that is as rabidly Islamophobic as it is anti-Semitic, and the occasional opportunistic politician, while abandoning the rest of campus. As tensions escalate here and elsewhere, Yale University, Harvard University, New York University, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, University of Michigan, and Brown University, to name a few, we question whether you understand the impact of what you have done. President Shafiq, this is your legacy. A president more focused on the brand of your university than the safety of your students and their demands for justice. In our April 18th staff editorial, we asked, what is the role of the university if not to advocate for and protect its students? Now, we ask, Columbia administration, what is your end goal? President Shafiq, you have made it abundantly clear that your priorities lie with Columbia's image and assets, not with its students. We have witnessed the total annihilation of Columbia as the advertised collegiate beacon of free speech, expression, and the right to protest. We have witnessed your capitulation to harmful media representation and opportunistic Republicans whose aim, it seems, is to put the values of a liberal education on trial. We have witnessed House Speaker Mike Johnson threatening intervention from the National Guard from the steps of Low Library, and a congressman calling for withholding financial aid from protesters in a press conference outside Columbia's gates. Your misguided allegiances and failure to negotiate effectively have encouraged an environment where individuals are emboldened to climb the 116th Street gates, wave the flag of self-proclaimed terrorist group Lehigh, and verbally harass students. How did we get here? While you remain selective in your care for your students' safety, they remain steadfast in their commitment to their community. In response to your identification of student protesters as a, quote, clear and present danger, unquote, an assessment NYPD Chief John Chell distinguished from the NYPD's perspective, thousands of us, along with faculty and guests from diverse cultural and religious backgrounds, have organized to uplift the spirit of the encampment. When the university fails to provide consistent community values, it is the true community of students who come together to fill that gap. Protesters have led teach-ins and assembly meetings, introduced and reinforced community guidelines, and manifested their own vision of meaningful university life. The students, not the administrators, have stepped up to protect one another from the media's eagerness to expose the demonstration as anti-Semitic, anti-American, or something else entirely irrelevant to Columbia University apartheid divests clear demands. As Kamala Harris so helpfully reminds us, everything is in context. President Shafiq, do you think, quote, you just fell out of a coconut tree, unquote? You exist in context, that is, the context of university presidents across history who have attempted to suppress and control student voices for change, while still shamelessly touting Columbia's storied history of protests. Your administration has proven not only to your students, but to the world, that Colombia hasn't learned from the past. Notably, the Vietnam War protests in 1968 and the anti-apartheid protest in 1984. It took Colombia decades to rebuild its image following the campus events of 1968. Undoubtedly, it will take time, too, for Colombia to rebuild after your decision to authorize the NYPD on campus. If your administration truly cares about the well-being and safety of its students, it should learn from not only the missteps made over the past week, but those made throughout the school year and throughout history. If you truly want to, quote, rebuild the ties that bind us together, unquote, you must confront the more than 30,035 Palestinian deaths and counting. Your students are not, quote unquote, dictating terms. They are calling on you and the administration to reckon with the unfolding atrocities in which Colombia is complicit. President Shafiq, your students are everything. But you're an economist, so we'll put it in economic terms. Your students are assets, not liabilities. What you do has ramifications not only for the future of this institution, but for the example you are setting of a tenuous relationship between administrators and protesters that will ripple across the country. All eyes are on Colombia. The Gaza Solidarity Encampment has sparked at least a dozen other encampments, from Emerson College and Tufts University to Brown and Vanderbilt University. Likewise, your choice to allow the NYPD to arrest protesters has now been aped in the arrest of 47 students at Yale and 120 at NYU. Our protesters are not only setting precedent, you are. And the example you are setting is a dangerous one. Everyone is watching, President Shafiq. Don't turn your back on your students any longer. Early Wednesday morning, you allotted the administration 48 hours to continue conversations. During this time, we hope you can reflect on the importance of your student body for your institution. We hope you can understand that the Gaza Solidarity Encampment does, in fact, stand in solidarity with Gaza. And as we write in defense of student protests at universities across the United States, we hope you can recognize there are no more universities standing in Gaza. Resorting to more campus militarization, more student demonization, and further ignorance of Colombia's complicity in war crimes will only cement your place on the wrong side of history. Just, wow. I'm literally getting goosebumps just reading. Like, they perfectly summarized just the impact of that the administration has, not only on Columbia University, but all these protests nationwide. I mean, really, they have been kind of the prime example, which is odd. I would like to note too, by the way, they say that the Gaza Solidarity Encampment has sparked at least a dozen other encampments, from Emerson and Tufts to Brown and Vanderbilt. Actually, Vanderbilt they first had an encampment set up. It was like, my gosh, I want to say all the way back in like maybe late March, early April. I mean, they've been going on for some time because I don't want to comment necessarily on like the timeline of events because I don't have that pulled up in front of me right now. But I did just want to note, technically it was Vanderbilt. Technically, really, the real instigators are actually here in Tennessee. Just saying. What I also love about this editorial is that it lays out directly how the school's administration is directly spitting in the face of the school's longstanding history of student activism, opting instead to invite a rather aggressive police unit onto its campus to arrest peaceful student protesters. Further, it shows that the school's administration is failing to listen to its student body or even respect any free speech policies that an academic institution should honor, whether private or public, to uphold a quality educational environment, which, by the way, students are paying hefty tuition bills and taking out loans to participate in. Agree or disagree with the protesting students' demands, these repeated denials by the university administration of their right to protest denies them of the product they are paying for. Now, this all came out before last Tuesday's events. I'm just laying out like the base context to understand the developments that happened in the past week. According to an April 30th Columbia Spectator article, quote, dozens of protesters occupied Hamilton Hall in the early hours of Tuesday morning, moving metal gates to barricade the doors, blocking entrances with wooden tables and chairs, and zip-tying doors shut. Protesters carrying barricades entered Hamilton through the leftmost door of the building at approximately 12:30 a.m. Burping there. Shortly after, a protester broke the window of the rightmost door as dozens more formed a human barricade directly outside the doors. Within minutes, protesters sealed the building while hundreds more flooded in front of the building. At around 1:40 a.m., protesters inside Hamilton unfurled a banner reading Hinds Hall, renaming Hamilton after Hind Rajab, a 6-year-old Palestinian killed by the Israeli military in Gaza. The occupation came nearly 2 weeks after University President Manoush Shafiq authorized the New York Police Department to sweep the Gaza Solidarity encampment on April 18th, leading to the largest mass arrest on campus since 1968, when student protesters also occupied Hamilton and over 80 people inside were arrested. A university spokesperson did not immediately reply to a request for comment. The university announced at 8:05 a.m. on Monday that negotiations between student demonstrators and the university had reached an impasse, and Columbia University apartheid divest warned of escalating action in a Monday post to the coalition's Substack. Quote, admitted students' day is over. Commencement is on its way, CUAD wrote in the post. Let's see how much of this campus we can reclaim by then, unquote. Hours later, a series of coordinated actions across campus preceded the occupation. At around 12:30 a.m., students began a large picket near South Lawn, marching toward the northern end of campus and away from Hamilton. Simultaneously, a stream of protesters carrying sleeping bags and backpacks diverged from the picket line, picking up black metal barricades as they rushed into Hamilton. Upon entry, protesters quickly set down their belongings and raced up the stairs, bringing tables and chairs from classrooms to block the doors from the inside, covering security cameras with black trash bags and tape, and shuttering the blinds. Protesters locked down the building in less than 5 minutes and allowed no one to enter. A facilities worker who was in the building exited the building at around 12:40 a.m. after shouting at the protesters occupying the Hamilton lobby to let him leave. As he left Hamilton, he yelled at the crowd, "They held me hostage," unquote. Protesters removed the barricades, blocking one door at 1:10 a.m., allowing several individuals who had remained inside Hamilton, including at least 3 facilities workers, according to a source inside the building, to leave. Afterward, the protesters immediately relocked the door. 2 students attempted to block protesters from barricading the front center doors of Hamilton, shouting, quote, "You don't have a right to tear down our university," unquote. At 1:25 a.m., the contesting students left, and the protesters reinforced the door barricade with metal tables and trash cans from campus, unquote. So, let's make this abundantly clear. Was this illegal? Yeah, obviously. But are the students morally justified in doing this? If we consider that the encampments on the outdoor areas were peaceful in their entirety, and that's according to all the reporting from the Columbia Spectator, some of which I think I've already covered, some of which we'll get to in a second. If we consider that these encampments were peaceful, contrary to what mainstream news outlets have been reporting and lying about, if I'm being quite honest, if we consider that Columbia administration, despite the peaceful nature of the first encampment, hounded the NYPD goons to arrest over 100 of the protesters, if, according to a Spectator article published on April 29th, if we consider that the administration failed to substantially meet any of the Columbia University apartheid divest demands in their negotiations, including no binding agreement to divest from Israeli-affiliated businesses and no binding agreement to lift student suspensions, if we consider that Israel's indiscriminate bombing of the Gaza Strip has resulted in a 90.9% civilian death rate, according to Euromed Human Rights Monitor, and if we consider a ruling from the International Court of Justice declaring that Israel's brutal retaliation of the October 7th attacks could amount to genocide, and finally, if we consider overall that Columbia administration has refused to take any of these contextual factors into account while addressing students' concerns, yeah, the protesters were absolutely justified in occupying Hamilton Hall. They tried peaceful protest, and in response, Columbia administration sicked the NYPD on them and gave only fake concessions at the negotiation table. And I want to make something clear about that evaluation too. That is, in no way, shape, or form, a call to action for anyone listening to or watching this show. I'll keep it real. This is an ass-covering statement to ensure our station's alignment with its own, as well as the FCC's policies. I'm providing an evaluation of the occupiers' actions, and you are free to do whatever the hell you want with it. You can disagree with it. You can agree with it. You can clutch your pearls and faint onto a nearby couch, making a false cry of antisemitism. Oh! You can do whatever the hell you want with my evaluation. That is all it is. An opinionated evaluation protected by the First Amendment, school policy, and the FCC's guidelines. Well, for now, at least. I'll touch on that development shortly. So, the student protesters took control of Hamilton Hall in the same manner that Columbia students occupied the building during both Vietnam War and apartheid South Africa protests. According to an April 30th Spectator article, President Shafiq, unsurprisingly, once again sicked her NYPD dogs back onto campus, where they violently arrested all of the occupiers of the building. The article reports instances of a student being thrown down the staircase and another one going unconscious. It was a mess. One that could have been avoided had Columbia administration decided to grow a conscience and listen to their students' demands to divest from companies affiliated with a nation that is plausibly carrying out a genocide. But no, dictator Shafiq would rather send the NYPD onto her university's campus to beat the shit out of protesters and take down the encampments that were entirely peaceful. Yeah, another April 30th article from the Columbia Spectator reported that the NYPD removed all of the outdoor tents. And she's going to let the NYPD's goons stay on her campus until May 17th, because quite clearly, she doesn't like it when students voice opposition to their school's financial ties to a nation that, again, and I'm going to keep hitting this nail on the head as long as I'm doing this show and as long as this horror continues to happen. Again, a nation that is plausibly carrying out a genocide as we speak. One that the United States is funding with our taxpayer dollars. Now, the Columbia protest was basically the spark for a bunch of other similar encampments getting set up at schools across the country. There was Yale, Harvard, NYU, University of Texas at Austin, Washington University from my hometown, St. Louis, woot woot, Vanderbilt University, and a ton more. Naturally, a lot of pundits in mainstream news outlets have been bemoaning the horrendous concept of students utilizing their right to free speech to protest a plausible genocide, smearing pro-Palestinian protesters in the process. I'll touch on that in a second. But first, what were the Columbia protesters' actual intentions? The Columbia Spectator put out an article on April 24th, announcing the 7th day of the encampment on the university's south lawn. And it describes intentions and actions of these protesters in a much different way than most mainstream news outlets have. While camping on the school's south lawn, students have put on a bunch of events, quote, including a Palestinian map art build, a poetry reading, and speeches from several guest speakers, unquote. Now, to be fair, the examples of speakers they listed weren't as notable to me. The ones I thought were the most notable, and I found out about these just through social media, those speakers were 2024 presidential candidate Cornel West. He stopped by the encampment. I forgot to write down like the day on here, so I'm trying to think of it myself, but I can't remember the day. Or maybe the date's on here. Okay, yeah, he posted this about a week ago, or that's at least what it says on Instagram. So that's the time frame in which he stopped by.
My boy! Yeah! I first want to say that I stand here in solidarity with each and every one of you. Yeah! Because we are in solidarity with human suffering, especially when it is imposed by human beings, and I'm talking about the indescribable genocide of our precious Palestinians in Gaza. Yeah! Can you hear my voice?
All right. On top of that, political scientist and expert on Palestinian history, Norman Finkelstein, spoke to the protesters again about a week ago. In my opinion, he seemed tired as hell, so I'm not going to play it for you, but he did show up to it. It was at about the 5-hour mark of this live stream. If you are interested, I'll probably still link it in case you are. Yeah, there's a picture of good old Norman Finkelstein. He's like just been on fire in about every media interview that he does. So it kind of makes sense that he's like tired out of his mind whenever he has to go attend like a really energetic student protest event. Anyways, he was just kind of out of it, and I'm not going to waste your time with that. The last person that I want to give a shout out to here, author Naomi Klein. She spoke to protesters on Passover. Now, for those who don't know Naomi Klein, she is the author of a book I've actually been meaning to read. It's called The Shock Doctrine. It was a scathing analysis of how the U.S. rallied the public to support the invasion of Iraq that was based on nothing but flimsy evidence and lies. Anyways, that's what she's kind of known for. But she's also, and I've read like excerpts of the book. I mean, even whenever that book came out back in like 2007, I mean, she was also, she even made like a few comments that were critical of Israel as well, just in that excerpt that I read. So anyways, I'll stop babbling. This is what she had to say.
About Moses and his rage when he came down from the mount to find the Israelites worshiping a golden calf. It is a lesson about false idols, about the human tendency to worship the profane and shiny, to look to the small and material rather than the large and transcendent. What I want to say to you this evening at this revolutionary and historic Seder in the streets is that too many of our people are worshiping a false idol once again. Yes. They are enraptured by it, they are drunk on it, they are profaned by it, and that false idol is called Zionism.
Damn! Damn!
It is a false idol that takes our most profound biblical stories of justice and emancipation from slavery, the story of Passover itself, and turns them into brutalist weapons of colonial land theft, roadmaps for ethnic cleansing and genocide. It is a false idol that has taken the transcendent idea of the promised land, a metaphor for human liberation that has traveled across faiths to every corner of this globe, and dared to turn it into a deed of sale for a militarist ethno-state. Political Zionism's version of liberation is itself profane. From the start, it required the mass expulsion of Palestinians from their homes and ancestral lands in the Nakba. From the start, it has been at war with collective dreams of liberation. I've been thinking about Moses and his...
So already, nothing here suggests any hint of anti-Semitism, and rather, it actually a deep respect for the Jewish faith. This isn't mentioned in the post. I read this elsewhere, but literally this was read at like a Passover Seder, like a Seder meal. Like literally they were celebrating, Passover. Anyways, I want to go back to the article, from the Spectator now, cause it also mentions, another speaker named, Mark Lamont Hill. And I thought, what the article had to say about him was pretty interesting too. Quote, Hill spoke at the encampment after Purnell. Purnell was another speaker there. He was scheduled to give on Wednesday the 2024 Mamie Phipps Clark and Kenneth B. Clark Distinguished Lecture at Columbia, an annual award that recognizes the extraordinary contributions of a senior scholar in the area of race and justice. In a Monday Instagram post, Hill wrote that he had canceled his appearance and, quote, will not accept the accompanying $10,000 award, unquote. Quote, I said, keep your blood money, Hill said in his speech at the encampment. I won't come into this campus until all students have their suspensions revoked, until the president steps down, and until this institution divests from an ethno-state, divests from an apartheid state, unquote. Burping right there. Hill also described October 7th, 2023 as a, quote, disgrace in many ways, unquote, in his speech, but encouraged students to consider the history that precedes October 7th. Quote, what happened on October 7th was awful, and from my moral compass, it was indefensible. The killing of civilians, the killing of innocent people, but history did not begin on October 7th, Hill said in his speech. Y'all pay too much money for tuition to not go deeper than October 7th. You have to understand this as a more than 100-year war on the Palestinian people, unquote. The Columbia chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace hosted a press conference in front of University President Manoush Shafiq's house on Tuesday. Jewish students who were suspended and arrested by the New York Police Department on Thursday restated their demands from the university, described their experience with slurs and backlash from their own community, and spoke about how their heritage informed their decision to stand with Gaza. Halfway into this article, and it's clear that this is much different from what other news outlets are fear-mongering about. There isn't a hint of anti-Semitism expressed by these protesters. One of their speakers, just as I have on this show, absolutely condemned the October 7th attacks for targeting civilians. And on top of that, there was even a Jewish student organization that actively supported these protests. None of this gets mentioned by mainstream news outlets, especially from the Wall Street Journal. If you type in Israel protests into the Wall Street Journal search bar, you will find some of the most blatant smear pieces masked as simple opinion. Now, I want to make this clear. Just because a newspaper publishes a wildly manipulative article under the guise of an opinion piece, that doesn't mean it is morally right or responsible for them to do so, even if they just label it as opinion. The whole point of a news organization is to publish reports and articles that have at least something credible and something of merit to their consumers. Such value is nowhere to be found in these opinion pieces on these pro-Palestine protests, though, demonstrating an overt bias that favors the views of administrators and pro-Israel groups. And it would be one thing. It would be one thing if the Wall Street Journal was at least displaying some kind of effort to approach their opinion pieces with an intent to portray both sides of the issue or act as a neutral disseminator of opinions. I still don't think that's the best way to handle the coverage of these protests, but at least they could demonstrate some semblance of fairness. But even a semblance of fairness is nowhere to be found from any of their opinion pieces. Now, I'm going to go through one of these articles in more detail. Here's an April 24th opinion piece from the Wall Street Journal titled, "Some Anti-Israel Protesters Are Paid." Quote, "Rockefeller and Soros Gramps are subsidizing those who disrupt college campuses," unquote. So this subheading implies that a majority of the protesters are being paid to be there. Well, my God, this should be a bombshell report. Spoiler alert, it ain't. It's absolute propaganda. Quote, "Since at least the Vietnam War, exasperated observers of student protests have rolled their eyes and thought, get a job." Unquote. Already, the author of this piece, Ira Stoll, yeah, he's lost me. Starting the article out with this line, one based on nothing but pure imagination, because how do you know most people think this way, implies that he sees that response, get a job, as a valid one. The idea alone that students don't have a job is incredibly stupid. For one, they do have a job. They're studying. They're becoming experts in their field of study. They are working on projects for the sake of academic pursuit. That's their job. Now, some might say in response to that, well, they're not getting paid to do it. Some actually are. It's called getting a scholarship for doing well in school, something that those who make arguments like this, and especially someone like Ira Stoll, would know nothing about. But even if you're not on scholarship, being a student itself is a job. Literally speaking, the definition of job doesn't exclusively refer to being employed by an organization. You still have jobs and responsibilities to fulfill as a university student. And that implication that being a student isn't inherently a job is incredibly dismissive to the work I do and to the work that every college student accomplishes on a daily basis. So this guy's already lost me due to his absolute contempt for student work and student activism. Sadly, I have to endure this idiot's piece to demonstrate how wildly misinformed or deceitful this guy is in his perspectives on these student protests. Quote, "In some cases today, activism is a job. Two of America's largest philanthropic foundations are behind a group that has paid some of the anti-Israel activists for the kind of antics disrupting campuses across the country. Consider Malak Afana, hope I'm pronouncing that right, a law student at the University of California, Berkeley, and Craig Burkhead Morton, a senior at Yale. Ms. Afana went viral this month for disrupting a dinner at Dean Erwin Chemerinsky's home. Probably butchering these names, but I'll roll with it. This week, the Yale Daily News reported that I keep wanting to say Mr. Brickhead. Mr. Burkhead Morton has been arrested for trespassing and then reemerged to address an anti-Israel crowd blocking an intersection in New Haven. Ms. Afana and Mr. Burkhead Morton have both been, quote, youth fellows, unquote, of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, whose website identifies them by their first names. As of April 4th, the campaign was soliciting applications for a new cohort whose, quote-unquote, campus-based fellows would receive stipends of $2,880 to $3,360 for 3-month terms of roughly 8 hours of work a week. That's work, quote-unquote, could include aiding campaigns that, quote, demand federal or state politicians cut U.S. military, financial, or diplomatic ties with Israel, unquote. The corporate entity behind these fellowships is Education for Just Peace in the Middle East. Where does it get its funding? George and Alexander Soros's Open Society Foundation has put $700,000 into Education for Just Peace in the Middle East since 2018, most recently with a 2-year grant in 2022, according to the Open Society Foundation's website. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund has given Education for Just Peace in the Middle East $515,000 since 2019, most recently with a 3-year grant for $225,000 awarded in August of 2023. While some policymakers have wondered whether activists receive money from overseas, it turns out that there's a clear paper trail of funding at home. That ought to have policy implications. In considering whether to discipline students for rule violations, university administrators might more harshly punish activism done, at least in part, for pay. Do the Rockefeller and Soros families want their money to be used to advocate for Hamas's war aims? They should consider that themselves. Meantime, Congress and the Internal Revenue Service might want to examine whether the grants fit the charitable purposes defined in the tax code. Unquote. So, I want to emphasize just a few, overlooked details from this writer, Ira Stoll, who I have to say, I think he may be the second dumbest opinion writer I have ever seen. I think he's only second to, who is it, Senator Tom Cotton back in 2020, whenever he wrote that piece for the New York Times calling on President Trump to call the military in on Black Lives Matter protesters. Anyways, though actually, I don't know, maybe Ira Stoll really puts his minuscule, tiny brain to it. Maybe he could find a way to write a somehow worse opinion piece than that. I'm sure he's capable of it. But the first thing I want to point out, the first just blatant error with this article, this guy, Ira Stoll, only cited two student protesters being paid by this group, U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. He never cites exactly how many of all these students in totality are working for this group. Does this guy genuinely think that the majority of the hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters at these schools are being paid to protest? Based off his knowledge of 2 protesters working for that group, does he actually think that is, in any way, sufficient evidence for the wild and broad claims that he's making? Second error that I want to point out with this. I wonder what this guy would have to say about the pro-Israel lobby's influence on college campuses. There exists a wealthy pro-Israel lobby within collegiate administration. This is from a Columbia University master's thesis titled "The On-Campus." Oh, I need to pull that up still. This is from a Columbia University master's thesis titled "The On-Campus Israel Lobby: How the Suppression of Palestinian Activism on U.S. College Campuses is a Multi-Million-Dollar Foreign-Funded Industry." This was published on February 7th of this year, was written by Holly Jackson, and I'm going to be going down to pages 50 to 51. Where are you at? There we go. Quote, "Jewish student life organizations are far from the only campus-based institutions whose activities have received Israeli government support. Several national campus-based Israel advocacy organizations receive Israeli government-affiliated funding. These include the Israel on Campus Coalition and the National Students Supporting Israel organization. Israel on Campus Coalition, henceforth ICC, was co-created by Hillel in 2002. Side note, Hillel is also like an Israeli-funded student religious group. They're more focused, though, on like facilitating like the actual practice of Judaism, and then they kind of dash in like a mix of Zionism with that too, to kind of give like a very simple explanation of who they are. Quote, since then, the ICC's budget has grown to almost $10 million per year. Per year, $10 million. I just want to harp on that for a second. This writer, Ira Stoll, is complaining about, in total, doing the math real quick here, $1.215 million donated over, what are we looking at? 2 years, some of them 3 years. So already this pro-Israel organization being pointed out in this master's thesis, already they have way more power, way more financial influence on college campuses. $10 million per year. Quote, it remains a close collaborator of Hillel, and Hillel frequently donates to its activities. The ICC's mission statement is unambiguous. They declare, quote, our mission is to inspire American college students to see Israel as a source of pride and empower them to stand up for Israel on campus, unquote. The ICC offers microgrants to any students who want to organize an event on their campus spreading pro-Israel sentiment. According to their website, they have built a network on over 200 different campuses in the U.S. So all of these students who are a part of Israel on Campus Coalition or who are affiliated with them, all of them, and by the way, ICC is on 200 different campuses. They get paid to just host not even protests, but just basic events. And this writer, Ira Stoll, is clutching his goddamn pearls about, what, $1.215 million to an organization that, first of all, I mean, granted, I guess, I don't know how many people actually know about Israel for Campus Coalition, but this guy, nonetheless, is showing no evidence to actually suggest that this so-called pro-Palestinian lobby or this massive network of donors are influencing student protesters on campus. He is not showing any evidence to that fact. And on top of it, too, there's actually much more evidence to suggest that the other side of this issue actually has much larger influence on college campuses. Now, I've spoken at length about this on my show before, but the pro-Israel lobby isn't just contained to college campuses. It's also in our government as well. And of course, there does exist a pro-Palestinian lobby. Of course, I think there's one called CARE. They're not just about Palestinians. They're about like, they're about lobbying on like interest for like Arab Americans as a whole. But same as with college campuses, the pro-Palestinian lobby has very little influence compared to the influence that the pro-Israel lobby has, especially including groups like AIPAC. This is from Open Secrets. In the past year alone, AIPAC has spent a grand total of $8.6 million buying out our politicians. J Street, another $1 million. Democratic Majority for Israel, $485,000. NORPAC, $300,000, basically all just $15 short of $354,000. NORPAC, or I already listed NORPAC. Then there's also a Republican Jewish Coalition at $237,000. The list goes on. So this absolute partisan hack, this Mr. Ira Stoll, this blatant smear merchant, he can spare me all of the pearl clutching about the wealthy pro-Palestinian lobby on college campuses when he refuses to acknowledge the even more dominant influence of pro-Israel money on college campuses, and worse, our government. And most importantly, that last part of the article aptly demonstrates how much of a dishonest hack this guy is. Scrolling down here. Quote, do the Rockefeller and Soros families want their money to be used to advocate for Hamas's war aims? If at this point, more than 6 months after the October 7th attacks, if you still can't distinguish support for the human rights of Palestinians from the support for a fucking terrorist organization, I have to classify you as one of two things. One, a dishonest, obstinate, conceited piece of fucking shit who refuses to engage in any good faith discussion about a plausible genocide and the rights of students being trampled upon. Or two, an absolute dumb mark who's gone too far down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and lies promoted by mainstream news organizations. And it seems we basically have those kind of people representing us in Congress as well. I'm sure you'll be surprised at this, but our representation in Congress sure as hell can't maintain an informed understanding of the plausible genocide in Gaza, the student protest, or, it seems, even the goddamn First Amendment. Here is a May 1st article from Al Jazeera. Did I link it? Title of the article, U.S. House passes controversial bill that expands definition of anti-Semitism. Quote, the United States House of Representatives has overwhelmingly passed a bill that would expand the federal definition of anti-Semitism, despite opposition from civil liberties groups. The bill, I had to burp there, the bill passed the House on Wednesday by a margin of 320 to 91, and it is largely seen as a reaction to the ongoing anti-war protests unfolding on U.S. university campuses. It now goes to the Senate for consideration. If the bill were to become law, it would codify a definition of anti-Semitism created by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, in Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That is a federal anti-discrimination law that bars discrimination based on shared ancestry, ethnic characteristics, or national origin. Adding IHRA's definition to the law would allow the Federal Department of Education to restrict funding and other resources to campuses perceived as tolerating anti-Semitism. But critics warn IHRA's definition could be used to stifle campus protests against Israel's war in Gaza, which has claimed the lives of 34,568 Palestinians so far. What is the definition? IHRA's working definition of anti-Semitism is, quote, a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities, unquote. According to the IHRA, that definition also encompasses the, quote, targeting of the state of Israel, conceived as a Jewish collectivity, unquote. That's a key point there. That kind of makes this a very nuanced kind of definition. Still very confusing. Anyways, let me get through the rest of this. Quote, the group also includes certain examples in its definition to illustrate anti-Semitism, saying, for instance, that, quote, the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor, unquote, would be deemed anti-Semitic under its terms. The definition also bars any comparison between, quote, contemporary Israeli policy, unquote, and, quote, that of the Nazis, unquote. However, IHRA does specify that, quote, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic, unquote. I gotta take a drink of water here. So I want to carefully speculate on the implications of this bill. In one sense, yes, there are definitely some statements it would prohibit that are absolutely not anti-Semitic. Comparing any nation to Nazi Germany is a common thing for people to do in criticizing any country. Russia, China, hell, even here in the US, people will compare their own government to Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany was the hallmark of authoritarianism, and out of a common understanding of that fact, people will make that comparison not out of hatred for Jewish people, but rather an abundant understanding of the bigotry that the Third Reich carried out against Jews. For instance, are we really going to codify into law that a college will lose federal funding if it tolerates a student or professor comparing Nazi Germany's ghettos to Israel's open-air prison that is Gaza? Now, some people might say, please, big dog, that's an exaggeration. Not really. Here's a clip from a documentary called Gaza Fights for Freedom, describing the area of the Gaza Strip. I don't think there's any... And for those who are listening on the airwaves, I'm getting a message on YouTube saying the following content may contain graphic or violent imagery. I guess you won't have to worry about the imagery if you're listening on the airwaves. If you're watching this, there might be something graphic. We'll see. It's only like
the Gaza Strip is only 25 miles long and about 5 miles wide. 2 million Palestinians live packed into this tiny space, one of the most densely populated places in the world. Half are children. Many live in refugee camps speckled throughout the besieged territory. A stunning 80% of the population relies on foreign aid. Aptly called an open-air prison, there are only 2 ways to leave the enclosed area: the Erez crossing into Israeli territory and the Rafah crossing, which goes to Egypt. Both are completely controlled by hostile militaries. What Israel calls a border is actually a heavily militarized perimeter fence comprised of barbed wire, surveillance networks, and lethal no-go zones. If you roam too close to the so-called no-go zone, which extends 300 meters out from the fence, Israeli forces have authorized themselves to shoot to kill. Thousands of unarmed Palestinians have been shot for violating this rule in 2018 alone. The same goes for Gaza's coastline. It is the only place in the world where you can't even flee by boat, as refugees elsewhere often do. Fishermen are restricted to only a few nautical miles from their shore. Straying past that, even by accident, you can be blown out of the water by Israeli warships. A massive seawall in the north and south, currently being extended, boxes them into their small sliver of sea. This violence is compounded by an economic blockade that imposes a chokehold of poverty on Gaza, resulting in one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, according to the World Bank. 70% of the youth are unemployed, with 52% for the general population.
So one can debate the minute differences between the ghettos and Gaza, sure. But to outright label that comparison in general as anti-Semitic? Again, no hatred of Jews can be found anywhere in that comparison. Rather, it's actually a recognition of the horrors that the Jewish people endured in Nazi Germany, and making that comparison to emphasize how terribly Israel is treating the Palestinians right now. So, even in some cases, this bill would absolutely threaten campuses to crack down on totally fair academic and humanitarian speech by broadly defining it as anti-Semitic. That said, the definition also says that criticism of Israel's policies isn't anti-Semitic? Question mark? quote, I need to pull up the source here. Boom. Quote, manifestations might include the targeting of the state of Israel, conceived as a Jewish collectivity, unquote. I want to make a side note here. So it seems like they're simply saying that it's anti-Semitic to criticize the state of Israel while conceiving of it as a Jewish collectivity. So would that make the State Department and the Biden administration's commentary as a whole anti-Semitic? Because I don't have a clip pulled up right now, but you can go find just about any statement that Biden has made about Israel, and he frequently, almost all the time, conflates Judaism with Zionism. He conflates the Jewish people with the state of Israel. So that's this part right here. If it's actually making that very clear that it's also anti-Semitic to conflate the Jewish people with the state of Israel, yeah, that actually seems like a good part of the definition, and something that most of our representatives and when I say representatives, I'm talking about House representatives and senators as well, and even people in the Biden administration, they seem to never reconcile with that fact that their constant conflation of the Jewish people with the state of Israel is just as, if not more, anti-Semitic. Because it's basically assuming, hey, because you're a Jewish person, that means that means that you are automatically somehow represented by the state of Israel, which is thousands of miles across the globe. I can't think of anything that would be the same thing as assuming that maybe the Iran or Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia somehow represents the interest of all Muslims. No, obviously not. And the same goes for Israel. Anyways, had to go on that side note because that is actually not a bad part of the definition. Just the problem is there are a lot of contradictions. I'll continue here. Quote, however, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. So it even makes that distinction, which is nice. Antisemitism frequently charges Jews with conspiring to harm humanity, and it is often used to blame Jews for, quote, why things go wrong, unquote. It is expressed in speech, writing, visual forms, and action, and employs sinister stereotypes and negative character traits, unquote. So it's a woefully contradictory definition. In one breath, it says that it is anti-Semitic to make certain yet valid criticisms against Israel's policies in and of themselves. But at the same time, it also says that it isn't anti-Semitic to criticize Israel through the same standards held against other countries. It's a confusing broad definition at best. And it's going to have a chilling effect on college campuses for sure. I mean, with the threat of pulling federal funding, that means colleges are going to be very, very strict about what can and can't be said about Israel, which leads me to my final point for this segment. If this law gets passed, and considering the mind-boggling, overwhelming support it did receive in the House, when this law gets passed, how is MTSU going to respond? I think speculation at this point might be a bit premature. I mean, I think it's all but guaranteed that it would pass, I would imagine. But it's still something that will be a pretty major concern for students and faculty members, including me. And again, I want to stress that this is speculation because while this bill probably will get passed, there's also no telling how it will actually be enforced. Yeah, so I don't want to totally scare people, but at the same time, it's going to be a concern for faculty members, for students here on campus. I mean, even for this show, it's going to be a concern. Depending on how the law is enforced and how MTSU responds to it, again, I may very well need to keep any commentary on the plausible genocide in Gaza exclusive to the video podcast version of this show and just cut it out from the version I broadcast here on WMTS. this station is funded by MTSU. So if the school is forced to accept this new nonsense definition of anti-Semitism in the Civil Rights Act, they might punish the station somehow if they deem my commentary to be anti-Semitic under this absolute BS definition. Again, that's all speculation, though. There is no way for me to know for sure until this law gets enacted, but that threat does seem real at this point. And the cherry on top, the only reason why this bill got passed so easily was because of the financial influence that the pro-Israel lobby exerts on our government. Here's just one example. One of the representatives who introduced the bill was this absolute shill named Josh Gottheimer. And he's a good old Democrat. So, this is something that both parties, both major political parties, are partaking in. The reports on Open Secrets about this Democrat representative, Josh Gottheimer, the reports on Open Secrets are absolutely astounding. In just this election cycle alone, this guy, Josh Gottheimer, so far has received the third highest amount of donations from the pro-Israel lobby, totaling $827,224. This guy's top contributor, again, from this year alone, is AIPAC, donating $212,559. This shill, this spineless hack, this immoral ally of a nation that is carrying out atrocities daily, introduced a bill that threatens one of the most important rights that, in my view at least, is the soul of this country. And he did that because the money talked. The fact that this threat exists speaks to today's unnatural state of affairs. We are now witnessing House representatives in Congress taking money from pro-Israel lobbying groups and then passing legislation that could very well crack down on criticism of Israel on college campuses, thereby spitting in the face of the First Amendment. And all this is being done as private university administrators send in cops. Actually, I take that back. Not just private, but even public, if you consider the University of Texas at Austin. They brought in a bunch of cops, too, to beat the shit out of protesters. So from both, all this is being done as both private and public university administrators are sending in cops to beat the shit out of their students because these same administrators refuse to divest from companies affiliated with a nation that is plausibly committing a genocide. That, my friend, is our unnatural state of affairs. Wealth corrupts our politicians and our school administrators, rotting our institutions from the top down. So a couple of weeks ago, during the April 16th show, I briefly spoke at the end about the United Auto Workers union election at the VW plant in Chattanooga. It was a critical moment for the labor movement in the South. Unions don't hold a lot of power. You'll see that if you read my coverage of the United Campus Workers campaign for biweekly pay in MTSU Sidelines, our student newspaper. That's especially apparent in Tennessee's provision that unions cannot collectively bargain with a state employer. So if you are employed by a state institution like MTSU, like I don't know. I don't know why I'm struggling to think of like other like state-run organizations, but if you are a state employee, you cannot collectively bargain with your employer. All you can really do is essentially like advocate for yourselves. So you can like have a meeting with them. You can discuss, you can have union representatives who like discuss workers' issues, but you cannot enter into a collective bargaining agreement. Now, of course, if you're working for a private company, then you can collectively bargain. And that's what some workers at the VW Chattanooga plant have been trying to do. The first step of that is, well, of course, they need to declare that they have a union by having an election. And 2 weeks ago now, they did have that election. And I am glad to say, very happy to say, that they fucking won. They won. This is from the AP on April 20th. Pull up the source view here. There we go. Title is Tennessee Volkswagen Employees Overwhelmingly Vote to Join United Auto Workers Union. Quote, employees at a Volkswagen factory in Chattanooga, Tennessee overwhelmingly voted to join the United Auto Workers Union Friday in a historic first test of the UAW's renewed effort to organize non-union factories. The union wound up getting 2,628 votes, or 73% of the ballots cast, compared with only 985 who voted no in an election run by the National Labor Relations Board. Both sides have 5 business days to file objections to the election, the NLRB said. If there are none, the election will be certified and VW and the union must, quote, begin bargaining in good faith, unquote. Side note, they actually did certify the election. I think it was sometime this week. I remember seeing a post on that on my either Twitter or Instagram, one of those two. Anyways, quote, President Joe Biden, who backed the UAW and won its endorsement, said the union's win follows major union gains across the country, including actors, port workers, Teamsters members, writers, and healthcare workers. That was honest slip up. Weird slip up there. Quote, together, these union wins have helped raise wages and demonstrate once again that the middle class built America. That's the name of the country. Yeah, America. And that unions are still building and expanding the middle class for all workers. Whew. Hey, someone fetch Jill. I need another Adderall. He said in a statement late Friday. That's totally exactly what he said. I can verify that for a fact because the guy's old as hell. What else do you want me? It's so difficult to read any quote from him without like thinking that he took like maybe 10 seconds between each word. I mean, this guy is literally crumbling, mentally speaking, before our very eyes. Y'all, I can't stress the importance of this news. This is a historic event in Tennessee, and not even just Tennessee, I mean, really the entire South. An April 22nd article from Jacobin captures its importance perfectly. Quote, the win makes VW the only unionized foreign-owned auto plant in the South. Side note, it's like that Nissan factory that we've got here in Murfreesboro. Also not unionized, but that might change. Quote, while the UAW represents several big 3 shops in the region, Ford and GM have plants in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Texas. The VW shop is the first Southern auto plant to unionize through a National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, election since the 1940s. That's momentous. The UAW has committed $40 million in additional funds to organize non-union and electric vehicle workers. And with this win, that campaign will accelerate. No longer can anyone say that it can't be done, unquote. The victory, quite frankly, puts Tennessee and really the entire South on the verge of a labor revolution. The next big UAW election is set to take place in May at a Mercedes-Benz plant in Alabama. So we'll see if that election further establishes a pattern of election victories. Of course, Governor Bill Lee, yeah, he is probably crying about the victory right now. Even still, 2 weeks later, I'm sure he's like crying himself to sleep every night, as he and 6 other governors penned a letter right before the election opposing the idea of workers having a democratic voice in their place. Side note, by the way, because I'm just thinking of this now, like, did he really think that workers are gonna listen to him? Like, oh, sure, thanks, Governor Bill Lee, the guy who's like a religious zealot and is also like bought out by a bunch of corporations. Yeah, we'll take your advice about what to do in our workplace. Like, what is even the strategic point of that? I digress. Here's what the letter had to say. Do I not have the letter pulled up? All right, here's the letter. Quote, "We, the governors of Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas, are highly concerned about the unionization campaign driven by misinformation and scare tactics that the UAW has brought into our states. As governors, we have a responsibility to our constituents to speak up when we see special interest looking to come into our state and threaten our jobs and the values we live by." Unquote. It's funny. It's hilarious. It's ironic. It is mind-blowing. It is fucking insane that Governor Bill Lee bemoans the influence of special interest, because it seems he's got his own special interest to take care of. Open Secrets reports that automotive industry donors, where's it at? There it is, that automotive industry donors provided the 5th largest amount of money, $50,400, to Bill Lee's campaign committee in 2020, and the 8th largest amount of money, $17,100, in 2022. He can pretend all he wants that he's a man for the people, but he's really a spineless religious zealot who represents corporations, not the people. And in most cases, these corporate stooges find ways to ensure that the will of their wealthy overlords are carried out. But in this instance, the will of the people prevailed. And with this victory at the VW plant, maybe, just maybe, we'll see these victories occur more often throughout the South. Maybe this unnatural state of affairs might get a bit more natural. Alrighty, so for those who don't know, I am the social media operator for MTSU's Young Democratic Socialist of America. And for the past year, and especially this past month and a half, gearing up for this meeting I'll be talking about in a sec, we have been doing whatever we can to try to get the word out about the effort to change the name of Forrest Hall on campus. Now, what is Forrest Hall? Forrest Hall is an Army ROTC building that was built in 1952 and then dedicated in 1956 to Nathan Bedford Forrest. This was a person who was a slave trader, a Confederate general, and I kid you not, the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. I get it. It's par for the course in the South to name buildings and monuments after such figures, but frankly, the MTSU community does not like that name at all. Really, the effort to try to change the name first started all the way back in like 2015. It was after that shooting that happened at a predominantly black church in either North or South Carolina. A lot of school administrators, including President Sidney McPhee, were pretty horrified by it. And whenever they had seen that some students and maybe even faculty members were kind of realizing that we have a building on campus that's named after a figure who, frankly, would kind of approve of such a horrendous act like killing civilians because of their race. Yeah, the MTSU administration was like, okay, let's get a task force put together, and let's see if maybe we can get the name of this building changed. As they found out, I don't know, I would say within a few years, it was going to be a much more difficult process than they anticipated, because, as it turns out, there's a Tennessee state law, it's called the Tennessee Historical Preservation Act, that says if there is like a building on like a public area that's dedicated to or named after a historical figure, the name change has to be approved by the Tennessee Historical Commission. All right. And also the people like making the petition, they basically have to justify the name change either with compelling evidence, with either compelling historical evidence or compelling evidence of a public interest. Really, in this case, MTSU just has both of those. Both those kinds of evidence. But unfortunately, whenever they first submitted a petition to get the name changed back in 2018 to the Tennessee Historical Commission, the commission basically gave them a middle finger. Their two reasons were a minority of the task force that they had assembled to like research Nathan Bedford Forrest and what to do for a name change. That task force, because there was a minority of that task force who had said that they didn't want to change the name, and because a chapter of alumni, the military science alumni chapter, because the majority of them in a survey said that they didn't want the name changed. The military science alumni chapter is comprised of about 1,600 MTSU alumni. In total, as of 2022, there are 148,000 MTSU alumni. So because a very small minority of alumni as a whole, and because a minority of the Forrest Hall Task Force didn't want to change the name, MTSU got shut down on that. They were just told, no, you can't do that. I think it was at the start of the start of this school year or last school year now, because I know the school year is finishing up. At the start of the fall 2023 semester, let's say, they submitted a petition to change the name again. And the meeting got delayed, the meeting got, because I think it was first supposed to happen in like October, then it got delayed to February, then it got delayed again till April. So really this entire school year, we at the YDSA have been trying to do really any kind of advocacy effort that we could to try to get the name of the building changed. And those efforts really increased in the past month and a half. We put up an online petition, which I'll include a link to it in the description below. I will say this is probably not going to be as well sourced, just because admittedly I didn't actually write a script for this one, but I felt like I could kind of talk on it without a script, just because I've been pretty involved in these efforts to get the name changed, at least within the YDSA. I know there have been obviously there have been other people who have been making these efforts, including Sidney McPhee himself, President Sidney McPhee. I don't know if I already mentioned that. So for the past month and a half, the YDSA, we've been making our own efforts to try to rally the public around this. Put up an online petition, and we got 253 signatures, and that's including physical signatures, because we also tabled outside, I would say every other day during the school week at least. And we also put out an open letter for different student groups to sign on to, and we got nine other groups to sign on to that. And on top of it too, we made a few Instagram posts telling people, hey, you should, submit a written comment or request to make an oral comment. I was set to make an oral comment as well. So the meeting happens on Friday, April 28th, up in Nashville at the Tennessee Tower. We drive up there very early in the morning, by the way, and we get there and we are told, so, and I should note, this is actually, according to the chair of the commission, it was actually the first time that this happened. yeah, we were basically told because there was not at least 2/3 of the commission that could meet. There are 29 members, and they at least need 20 members to like make any kind of decision. Because they couldn't even get 20 members, they decided to postpone the decision until June of this year. So, bit of a bummer for me because I was kind of hoping to deliver that oral comment, but it's not that big of a deal because I can still submit it as a written comment because I'm going to be in DC, so I won't be able to show up for that meeting. I'll probably still do their Zoom thing, though. I'm going to turn now to a post that the YDSA really, I actually crafted it, but, it also got approved by everyone else, by all the other officers in the YDSA. I'm going to switch now to this post that we at the YDSA made regarding Forrest Hall. We made this on our Instagram. You can follow us at MTSU-DSA. I know it's very confusing because we're the YDSA, but whoever made the account before I even came here was like, nah, MTSU-DSA. That's the name we should go with. Alrighty. I guess technically, because you are able to change usernames, so I guess I really shouldn't be complaining about it. If I really have an issue with it, I should just change it myself. Whatever. Anyways, regarding Forrest Hall. Last Friday, 8 of our members drove to the Tennessee Historical Commission's meeting at the Tennessee Tower to voice our support for changing the name of Forrest Hall. The result of the meeting was unexpected. The commission decided they will delay their consideration of MTSU's request to change the name of Forrest Hall until June 21st. The Tennessee Historical Commission requires 2/3 of its members, at least 20, to be present at meetings to vote on petitions for waiver. Because only 20 commissioners were present and because one of them had to leave by 11:30 a.m., the commission was not going to have the time to hear MTSU's case for its request to change Forrest Hall's name. Thus, deliberation on MTSU's request was pushed back to June 21st. None of our members were allowed to deliver their oral comments, and none of the written comments submitted for yesterday's meeting will be considered on June 21st. We were not informed about this until we arrived at the meeting in Nashville. Commissioner Chair Dorita Coleman Williams said that this was the first time this has ever happened, so we have no reason to suspect any conspiracy. That said, we kindly suggest that the commission establish procedures to inform the public when a quorum of the body cannot meet. Yeah, that was us being very kind. That was actually incredibly ridiculous that we were not given any kind of prior notice before the meeting, but nonetheless, fortunately, the meeting was not a waste of time. We at least learned that the Sons of Confederate Veterans, SCV, are actively opposing MTSU's request. This is not a group that only advocates for historical preservation. Rather, as their website states, this is a group dedicated to, quote, preserving the history and legacy of the Confederacy's heroes, unquote. Heroes? Yeah, we're going to harp on that in just a sec. Quote, the wording of their contradictory mission statement implies a darker intention than simply preserving the history of the Confederacy. No entity can accurately preserve the Confederacy's history and legacy while still referring to its troops as, quote-unquote, heroes. The Confederacy's military betrayed its country to defend institutionalized slavery. To refer to these men as heroes inherently upholds and glorifies the perverse values of the Confederacy. That is the Sons of Confederate Veterans' real intention in opposing MTSU's request. Not to preserve the history of the Confederacy, but to glamorize it entirely and impose the Confederacy's values onto MTSU's campus. In fact, their slimy spokesperson at the meeting, Edward Phillips, attempted to impose such beliefs on our members after the meeting. The guy butted into our discussion to ramble about how we need to face our history and repeatedly assert that he supports the preservation of all historical monuments, which begs the question as to why he works with a group that advocates for only Confederate iconography. We have no problem facing our country's and state's history. We've been doing just that in our recent reading on Nathan Bedford Forrest in preparation for yesterday's meeting, and we even confront that history in all of our meetings as we analyze the failures of the United States' late-stage capitalist economy and discuss the necessary solutions. We have no problem with people learning about the history of their country from books, movies, lectures, museums, etc. What we don't approve of is conflating education about the grim realities from our history with the glorification of such realities. What we certainly despise is the utilization of that conflation to justify the imposement of Confederate values on our campus. Keeping the name Forrest Hall for our school's ROTC building does just that. It honors a slave trader, Confederate general, and the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, holding absolutely no educational purpose nor any alignment with the community values of MTSU. Buildings should be dedicated to the people who have contributed improvements to our local, state, national, or global community. Nathan Bedford Forrest did the exact opposite, and therefore deserves to be condemned in books, not glorified on a public university's campus. With that said, we will prepare for the June 21st meeting. Our petition is still available online, which you can send to your MTSU friends if you haven't already. Written comments and requests for oral comment will need to be done again, so we will let you know when the commission begins accepting those. We'll continue inviting other student organizations to sign on to our open letter. We are planning additional actions to take before then, so you can keep an eye on our Instagram as we finalize these plans. Thank you for your continued support. In solidarity, the MTSU Young Democratic Socialists of America. Yeah, that Edward Phillips guy, that guy, like, it is an understatement to say that this guy was absolutely slimy. This guy, like, he looks like he was about to sell you, like, the shittiest used car you have ever seen in your life. Granted, I don't think this guy's, like, really getting paid. I think he's doing that, like, as, like, a volunteer thing or whatever, so I guess the guy's honest, but also this guy is incredibly stupid, and frankly, I think there's some internalized racism that he just does not want to address. So, and on top of it too, this guy also, yeah, I wish. So the thing is, the day of that meeting, I had barely gotten I had gotten maybe a few hours of sleep, because I was trying to, like, cram in enough time to, like, edit for to edit a recording of this show that I was hoping to broadcast that day, but sadly that didn't happen. Anyways, I was sleep deprived as hell that day, so I didn't even recognize who it was until, like, he came up, until, like, maybe I would say, like, a few minutes into him, like, talking to us. I mean, literally, we were just kind of, like, standing around, and he just butts into our conversation and starts, like, going on about, like, yeah, you know, like, I appreciate y'all, like, coming down here showing an interest in your community, but, like, I just have to say, like, this, it is so important for us to, like, face our history, and, you know, this doesn't have anything to do with, like, race. I've got, like, a few, I have, like, a friend who's, like, dad or something like that was part of the Tuskegee Airmen. I just wish I recorded all that, because, yeah, had I done that, I think I would have had some very interesting content to share with y'all, because this guy was just an absolute sleazebag. And then on top of it too, dude, we drove all that way up there and also, like, submitted, like, a bunch of petition signatures and an open letter to get the building changed. What the hell makes you think that talking to us right after that meeting is, like, gonna change our minds? Like, the guy was just wasting his breath. I honestly, I think he was just, like, trying to demonstrate, like, how smarter and, like, high-minded he actually is than these pesky liberal college students. Granted, to be fair, he didn't actually call us that, but that was certainly the attitude with which he was approaching that conversation. So, anyways, yeah, I hope that my comrades at the YDSA don't have to deal with them in person that much at the next meeting. I'm glad that I won't have to, because I'll be in DC doing an internship. So that'll so I'll still like tune in to the like the broadcasted meeting. They always have like an online like a video call. It's through not Zoom, but like Microsoft Teams. That's it. They always do like a video call. So if anyone wants to like zoom into their meetings, they can do that too. So I certainly will be doing that. And if you are interested in seeing the name of Forrest Hall changed, I'll leave a link to our petition in the description of this, of this upload to the kennel for this episode, The Unnatural State of Affairs. Which again, for those who are listening on WMTS, you can find that recording, this recording that's broadcasting to you right now. You can find it at thekennel.substack.com. And there you can, like I said, you can find links to all the sources that I cite in these videos. And especially, like I said, with this episode, you can also find resources as to how you can get involved in the movement to change the name of Forrest Hall. So